Okay.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the January 25th meeting of NUARI, Needham Unites Against Racism Initiative. Tonight is a public hearing for us, but I'm going to go quickly through our script relating to conducting open meetings. This open meeting of the NUARI Working Group is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location, but we're encouraged to participate remotely. We're meeting remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so the public can follow along with deliberations of the meeting. And tonight there will in fact be public participation for this hearing. So we're grateful to all of you who have come to attend this evening to provide us feedback. The meeting is being recorded, and so we just ask you to keep that in mind. So with that, I want to start by saying hello to everybody this evening, and I want to introduce the committee so that you can see the committee that has been working since the end of October. Let me go through, and if people can at least give a wave so people can see where you are. Matt Borelli.
Good evening.
From the Select Board. Sue Neckes from the School Committee.
Hi there.
Jen Howard from the Needham Human Rights Committee.
Hello, everybody.
Marcus Nelson from the Needham Human Rights Committee.
Hey, everyone.
Jay Spencer, the owner of French Press.
Good evening, everyone.
Ramin Abershamian, member of the Needham Clergy Association.
Hello, everyone.
Vivian Hsu, a resident and also member of the Personnel Board.
Evening, everyone.
Natasha Espada, a resident and principal and founder, I think, or CEO of Studio NA.
Good evening, everyone.
And I should say member of PBBC in your case. Not to use initials, the Permanent Public Building Committee. Dr. Toyin Fayemi.
Good evening.
Pediatrician and resident.
Hi.
So thank you all for being on the committee, and so that everybody in town knows who has been doing this work. I will note that the committee has been meeting frequently. We have been meeting since the end of October, and we started by planning to meet twice a month. It's ended up being more than that, and so I'm grateful to the committee for taking times to wiggle in meetings between meetings as it became clear to us that we weren't able to accomplish everything we'd hoped for. I also want to let the public know that we have received 1 email and 8 submissions on the survey form so far that the committee has had a chance to read. We're hoping that more people will provide feedback over the course of the evening and over the next few days leading up to our next meeting on February 8th. But we'll continue to, we have a note with that information about how to contact us farther along in the meeting or at the end of the slides. So what are we hoping to accomplish tonight? I want to start by recognizing that public hearings may not be the perfect process and the perfect space for everyone, but we are trying to create a space and a place for people to talk about their hopes for the community here. I also welcome that, recognize that doing this in public over Zoom can be challenging. So we do say that you're welcome to write to us at nuari@needhamma.gov. There is the survey, but it's a public hearing, not a public dialogue. So we are here to hear the feedback from you. This is really not a back and forth. And part of why we do that is so that everybody who wishes to tell us something has the opportunity to speak. And sometimes if you engage in back and forth, then you don't get the opportunity for as many voices. So we're trying to let all the voices in and still help and ensure that everybody is in fact heard. Tonight, we're sharing the vision statement and the guiding principles that the group has worked on and drafted. It's our initial work. The vision statement is, we believe, by definition, intended to be inspirational, aspirational, and forward-oriented. It was important to the committee that our statement be optimistic, so we hope that comes through. With your feedback, we'll engage in another round of discussion and tweaking so that we're ready to ask the Select Board to consider and adopt the vision for the town. With their acceptance, Newari will also ask the board to forward the vision to other town boards and committees for adoption. We hope the vision and guiding principles will become foundational to all of our work. I've heard from a number of people asking about metrics. It's probably the thing that people are most anxious for right now. So I do want to say upfront that there will be metrics, but the work is not yet at that stage. For a challenge that's been 400 years in the making, the committee's only been at work since the end of October, and Newari is working carefully to give issues their appropriate and fair consideration. So I'm going to thank all of you in advance for your patient support of the work as it unfolds. So with that, I'm going to ask people who are participating in the hearing tonight to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Conciseness is always appreciated in public hearing. Feel free to ditto someone else quickly before building on what has been said. And we're really trying to understand if this statement and these principles resonate with you, if there's something critically important that's missing or that needs to be added. And we're also open to the idea that something should be subtracted, so the most important items are in focus. All right, we will ask that you raise hands. Now, Katie, I know that we have some slides and I actually want to go through them because there's probably a couple more things that I know I want to cover in there. If you can share, that would be great. All right.
Does that look all right?
Yep. If we can move to the next slide. A little bit of history. In July of 2020, the select board launched this initiative and the town started working to identify the participants who would serve on the committee. In October, the working group was formally formed and began to meet at the end of that month. All right, next slide. I've gone through and introduced everybody, and I am grateful to them for their service on this committee. I want to look quickly at the charge. The committee was given a charge by the select board. The first item was in fact, or is in fact, articulating a recommended vision for racial equity in Needham and guiding principles that will inform the future actions. So that's the piece that we're bringing to you tonight. There are a number of other pieces of the charge that the committee has not yet engaged with and that we will continue to work on. We are expecting to bring an interim report for our work to the select board and to town meeting in May. Next slide. I know that a number of you have had a chance to see these since they were distributed ahead of the meeting. All right, this is a list of, in fact, all the meetings that we've held. So you can see, you know, we are up in January to 3 meetings for the month. Okay, but what we've talked about at each. I think in the beginning, we actually talked about having one session to focus on identifying our vision. The answer is that was not enough for us to thoughtfully and intentionally consider getting the right words in the right place. And it is such a critical part of all the work that the town has going forward that we wanted to be sure we got it right. So we have been devoting significant time to that, and that's what we're here with this evening. Next slide. I want to give a shout out and some gratitude to our facilitator, Lisa Smith McQueenie. Lisa has worked with the committee throughout the vision setting process to ensure that everybody's voices were heard and incorporated, and multiple ways of getting our feedback on how we were thinking about issues of racial equity in town and what our wishes, hopes, and dreams were for the future. She was a real find, and we are grateful to the school committee, actually, to the Real Coalition for helping us to get a lead on finding her, and grateful to her for working with us. Next slide. So just so that people know what the next steps are with the vision setting process, we are having our public hearing tonight. As you know, with feedback through the survey, through Newari, or through this meeting. The Newari Working Group will meet again at the beginning of February to discuss and vote on a recommendation to the Select Board. All right, and then the Select Board will actually discuss that recommendation on February 9th. So those are upcoming meetings you may wish to watch for. I am going to read just the bolded paragraph. All right, the rest of it, again, I know that many people have been reading this and thinking about it because I've heard comments from people over the weekend and seen several things. So our draft vision, our elevator speech, as we would call it, is Needham will be a community free of racism, racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Our residents, schools, businesses, organizations, and government will work together to identify barriers and create solutions, opportunities, resources, and support leading to racial equity. And then we have a number of points to support that vision statement. Okay. Next, we identified, Katie, on our next slide, some guiding principles for future actions. And in this particular case, we identified a number of points. And again, I know people have been looking at them. We've had some suggestion for ways that people thought it could be better phrased or other topics that could be considered. And we are really interested in your feedback on these this evening. So our guiding principles for future action. And we can go ahead and put these up at various points where people are trying to comment if that's helpful. And Katie, the last thing I want to talk about just briefly are the intentional practices. So we've also drafted a set of intentional practices. These have had less discussion by the committee, but it seemed that it was valuable to bring them to everybody this evening as well. And they are practices that we believe can help the town and its residents and community members realize our vision for racial equity. They are actions that the committee would be committed to doing, and we would hope that others would join us in these practices. Next slide. Lisa has gotten us every meeting, taking a moment to stop and look at our meeting norms and agreements. I'm putting these up for everybody this evening because, in fact, I hope that they are agreements that everybody who's here tonight to provide feedback will also adopt, and be patient. As we keep saying, patience is part of the process, and we are interested in hearing and listening and carrying with us the feedback that you give us this evening. So with that, we want to hear with you or hear from you. If we can take the slides down and go back to the committee. We've asked that folks raise their hands, and we will ask Sandy to bring people over to address the committee so that we can hear your feedback one at a time. So with that, the floor is open. John Kirk. John.
Mr. Kirk, you're
Hello, folks.
muted. There you are.
Thank you very much. I thank everybody for all of the effort. You mute that, please. For all the effort that's been put into this creation of, and then the delivery of this exceptional effort. I had a couple of questions. I think there may end up being somewhat repetitive of other things you may hear, but I wanted to just put them forward. These are more process oriented than they are directly related to the issues that are contained in the statement that have been made. But you know, feel that they're worth some time. One question that a lot of folks have had is how the leadership of the committee has been established. And has been referenced the membership. I'm unfamiliar with the charge, having established a chair, but concept here, you know, of perhaps being more sharing in the leadership role is something that I want to put forward as to the group. Another that has not been directly addressed, Article 17, which received overwhelming support and typically focused on education and housing and policing, is areas related to systemic racism and white supremacy. Their examination was overwhelmingly approved. Ultimately, in a majority were also supported it, and while it's referenced in various ways.
John, I don't know if I'm the only person having trouble hearing you. May I suggest that you turn off your video?
Both the committee.
John,
I'm
may I
sorry.
suggest that you turn off your video because you are cutting in and out, and I think we're all struggling to hear you. So let's see if it works better if you're just doing voice.
Oh. Yeah, I'm going to apologize. We're actually in video that has.
It's
Nope,
not much better.
Not happening.
No.
Not happening. Okay, I will defer. My apologies.
So we caught some of it, and we will carry what we can, and we'll provide feedback on what we've heard.
We lost Mary Ann? Yeah, where's Mary Ann?
She's just in the attendee list. Sandy, if you can promote her back over.
Okay.
Thank you.
Apologies, Mary Ann.
Oh, it happens. It's tricky.
Names jump. So sorry.
There we go. So I think John is going to return to the
Yes, he is.
attendees. And I think I saw Kathy Friedberg. Was she up next?
Yes.
I think she was up next.
Yes, she
Okay.
is.
Looks like my list has shifted a little, but so if Kathy could come over, that would be wonderful.
Kathy's on her way.
Hi, Kathy, if you could please unmute.
That would be helpful. Thank you for all your work. I was trying to feverishly write down the vision statement. So I really just wonder if it's possible to see the vision statement while we're having the discussion. I don't know if that's possible, or else put it up again.
So Katie, I think you can put it up and you are welcome to speak to it.
Oh, I'm not, it was just that I really didn't have a chance to really see it beyond your reading it, and then it was gone.
Ah, you know what? We don't have a chat on this session, right, Katie or Sandy? No? So the best thing I can recommend, Kathy, would be that you go to the website,
Okay.
to the Newari webpage. It is posted there, and that way you can pull it up and be looking at it.
Perfect. I'll do that on my phone. Thank you.
Terrific, thanks. I think Kathy White-Mertz might be next, or I'm seeing her next in my list. So for anybody who hasn't seen the vision statement yet, if you go to the Newari page on the website, you will find it linked there. It was also sent out through the town's Notify Me list. So if you're not on Notify Me yet and signed up for the Newari notifications, that's something else you might wish to do. Aha, it's Noah.
Sorry,
masquerading as his mother.
I
Hello there, Noah.
had changed my name. I'm on my mom's Zoom. Yeah, so I just to like reiterate what John was saying, because it was kind of hard to hear. The question was just about how the committee leadership was established, and if there were any way to potentially look into like a rotating leadership, like something that a lot of groups do is like have one person lead one meeting, and then the next meeting, at the end of that meeting, you talk about who might lead the next one, something like that, just to kind of share the leadership onus. And also, I just want to say I've watched every Noari meeting, and I really want to thank you all for everything that you've been doing. You've been putting a ton of time and effort into this, and it's just been really heartening to watch. And I appreciate you all being so involved and invested. So yeah, as I was driving home today, I was thinking, I grew up here, and I've just been thinking a lot lately about how this town sort of came to be what it is, and like what forces were at play historically and still today to shape Needham into what it is. You know, what the houses look like, the demographics of the people who live here, and as we're all learning and all hopefully know by now, the government and private interest as well. But the government had a very strong hand in sort of forming what towns look like through policy, and I just wanted to make the case, make the statement that in order to right the wrongs of history, we're going to need government leadership very involved in getting us forward and moving through where we are. Like to get out of the status quo, we're going to need the involvement of those in power. It can't just be coming from the activists on the fringe. It's going to have to really be changing at the level of the policy, and inaction, and just kind of maintaining the status quo, what I think would be a gross injustice, especially casting it in terms, I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but like casting it in terms of like personal, like it being a personal matter who decides to live where. I think we all know that that is not really the case, and how the suburbs came to be what they are. So yeah, as John mentioned too, Warrant Article 17 clearly demonstrated that the people of Needham want us to be looking into and rooting out systemic injustice in our town. And I think the Noari committee, or the Noari working group is doing that work. And I just hope that it can be sustained and can be empowered to actually translate into those systemic changes that are long overdue for Needham. Things like housing and zoning, and accountability of our public safety. Thank you again for all of this work, and I look forward to continuing to help out in whatever way I can.
Thank you, Noah. And we appreciate your taking the time to be a regular viewer and stay up with the process. So our next speaker is Nicole Argo.
Here we go.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I want to just start by commending this committee for your work so far. And I know that we're all focused on what's next and how to make this better, and really hopeful for all the things that can happen. But there's no doubt that the effort it takes to articulate a vision, it's huge. It requires a lot of groundwork, including, bringing diverse perspectives into and holding a space where the problem can be contextualized, where everybody has a common understanding of the problem and a language for discussing it and other perspectives. And there's relationship building, which is necessarily a process that takes sustained interaction. So all of this is a stretch, and it brings people into uncomfortable places. And I know you all have been doing that for recent months. Thank you. It's a beginning, and we can't forget to acknowledge it and appreciate it. So thanks for that. Thanks for what's to come. I was really heartened to see the objectives that you've coalesced around so far. And I didn't have a lot, I didn't think there was anything huge missing in terms of concrete pieces. And there's not so much I would add. But there were kind of broad process-related issues that I wanted to raise here. And one of them was measurement. Marianne, as you already said, This has been something you hear of a lot, and probably as a committee, you talk about it nonstop. But as I was reading through the wonderful objectives in the statement, it kept occurring to me that each of them can be measured, and it's a best practice to design with measurement in mind. So some of these measures have obvious data, right? How often different groups are pulled over, et cetera. But it also might be useful for the town to consider getting feedback on its proposals as you're starting to put them down in more concrete form. So proposals or potential proposals, like via a representative survey of residents, to just hear how people are thinking about what the big issues are and what solutions or efforts most appeal to them. And even follow-up surveys, which then would look at that first survey as a baseline to measure welcoming and inclusion, equity, and social cohesion. These are all things that Needham is talking about being a forerunner or a founder of, right? To start a movement and be seen as the starter of such a movement. So I think data in that range of forms, all of it might be on the table to be really plumbed by the committee. And measurement should be a priority as a vision takes place. And then my other question really was just, what's the process for making this happen? So who's going to coordinate it? Whatever the vision that ultimately is embraced, who coordinates the implementation, who's monitoring and reporting on it? And who will have the power and funding to do that work? And I understand, these are huge questions and you're really just beginning. I just want to note that, if the committee is simply providing recommendations and guide rails, it's going to be an uphill battle for the excellent town, domains and bodies to implement them. All the bodies in town already have things that they are responsible for, and adding to that when it's not part of your core focus is just, it doesn't matter what program you are, what organization you are, it's always hard. But if we're serious about enacting these changes, then it should probably be the people who have thought most and who care most about the issues who are guiding and monitoring them. So in my view, giving this committee the power and resources to do that will be not just critical, but essential for making sure that the kind of change you're envisioning is able to take place. And then lastly, just as a resident, and I'm gonna end back on a note of appreciation and just like happiness that this is happening. It's really heartening to hear that we are at the forefront, that, Marianne, you said we want to establish this this mission statement or these objectives and then share them with other towns. And I have to say, I know that Needham is a founding town for Race Amity Day. I know that lived experiences started here, and that is now in 7 other communities. And there's a very strong possibility it's going to become a national program. And with Newari, I think Needham has a real opportunity to make a name for itself here. And so I would just say, make sure that as you go forward, you're thinking about evidence and data to show that what you're doing is happening and working, and a process that empowers this committee to make sure it can do that.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Appreciate you.
Yeah. All right. Smitty Rao. We can bring Smitty over. Hello there,
Hi,
Smitty.
Hi, I'm Smriti, and I'm a longtime Needham resident. And I am, again, thank you for all the work you've done. And I'm so impressed with how far this mission statement goes, much further than I think a lot of other documents I have seen. I want to follow up on Nicole's point. I do think there's an issue of data and evidence. And in particular, I was kind of looking at the principles for future action. And I did kind of submit a response form too. So I'll just say this briefly. I also think, so I think it's good to have metrics, but it's very difficult to pick the right ones. So to follow up on Nicole's point, one question might be whether Nuari wants to be the body that picks those metrics, or it wants to be the body that has the power to push the authorities who have access to that data to develop those metrics and report them back to Nuari. I think Nuari should have power to enforce some of these, but I don't know if Nuari needs to be the body that decides what those metrics are, because I do think, and so here I come to the specific metric around policing, I think there's some evidence that there's some aspects of policing that occur before any offense or ticket is actually recorded. So there is disparity in treatment. For example, when somebody is handcuffed, that doesn't necessarily get recorded as data anywhere if it doesn't result in an arrest or an offense or whatever, right? If the person is released because it turned out they were handcuffed incorrectly. So I think we want to be careful not to prejudge what the right metrics will be. And I think we, when it comes to policing, for example, I think many of us have said this, there is a disparity in how policing is governed compared to public health or the schools and so on. So what Nuari could do, I think, is push the governance of policing and fire and other public safety in town to produce, to incorporate some of these mission related aspects, and then to produce the kind of data that would be useful to evaluate whether or not these commitments are being followed through. So I just worried a little. The policing was one where you did have very specific metrics, but I wonder if those are necessarily the right metrics. And I wonder if if it needs a little bit more careful study so that the board's hands are not tied later on by a commitment to these metrics. So I just wanted to say that, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person who would be coming over is Marcus Hughes. And I could just say, make a general observation. The committee also has seen a set of objectives. And if you've been following our meetings, you would have seen that we did actually look at a set of objectives that would layer in or scaffold and provide more detail to the guiding principles. And they're sort of broken down by some of the key areas like housing and policing, hiring, etc. But we're not ready to bring those forward yet. And they're really intended as starting points for discussions for each of those areas. I think we felt that they would be better informed after we'd had a chance to hear from those areas about some of the work that was going on. So I think that's consistent with what has been suggested, that they do need to be informed by the people who are actually doing the work and would be committed to them. But we definitely see that measurement is an important part, and having objectives will be key going forward. Marcus Hughes, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Marianne. And you have to forgive me, I have my two daughters here who are very eager. It's their first public meeting, so they're very curious about what's going on. But I just wanted to thank all of you for your participation. And I've seen some of you around town. I think that, it's great to see, I'm fairly new to town. I've been here for 4 years, and to see such a great cross section of Needham on such a really important issue is really great to see. And I know how hard the discussions are. I just wanted to say, I think that your sort of, goals are really great. And I think that it's really forward thinking and really thoughtful about the huge problem that is racism in general. We're just a microcosm of the larger, problem in this country, as we all know. And I just want to say the 2 points. The point about American history being, really important, and just wanted to incorporate like the full story of American history for all residents, I think is a really good point. If we could also expand that to civics education, I think from the events that happened, on January 6th, we saw a lot of people who just really, didn't understand our system And a lot of that was motivated by racial animus. And you can see that play out through a large part of this country. And so I think of, trying to bring back civics education in a real form that's not just about, electives, but actually making sure that it's in as part of our schools is, it has to start at a young age, I think is really important. And then on the other point, I know other speakers have brought up about police stops and, the importance of showing metrics around that. If it would be a great idea if there could be, as part of that, I think, oversight, and there has to be some accountability on police in this town. If there is some, I don't know if there already exists or, but there should be some kind of, citizen review board of some sort to see, how, decisions around arrests, around stops, around just overall, resources that are being dealt in different parts of Needham, interactions with children of color in our schools, with police, all of those metrics can be not only taken down, but also reviewed by citizens that are a nice cross-section like this group would be a really good start. And I think finally, buy-in, just keeping that as a really important principle is that, it's really good to see that we see a lot of, there's a lot of, with the Black Lives Matter movement throughout this last spring and summer, it was great to see so much diversity and see a lot of a lot of white people really think that this is important and they wanted to, pass that down to their kids as anti-racism is important. I think we always have to keep in mind that buy-in from the larger community is important as we push forward on this work. So thanks a lot for everything that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Marcus. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming, speaking. Rebecca Weber. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi.
You are here.
Hi. So I think nice to see you all. I think part of what I'm going to do is just agree with several of the previous commenters, and Marcus and Smriti on the topic of oversight. And I really envision a dashboard that is easy to read, that is transparent, that again, when these metrics are developed, that, can be seen by all. And a number of people mentioned policing, which is obviously an important piece of everything. I helped to submit a public records request to, the department was, incredibly collaborative in working through this request and how we should word the questions and everything like that. But one thing I was really struck by was the incredible amount of labor that the officers had to do to answer our questions. So for example, we asked, how often do we handcuff people and what is the race of the people we handcuff? And this took somewhere between 12 and 15 hours of manual effort for an officer to answer that question. And they did and everything. It was expensive. But to me, I think, it's for any department to have oversight, you need to be able to have access to how are you doing? Are there any discrepancies that we need to work on, that there's opportunity there? And so I just wanted to add that piece to the puzzle, that in order for everyone to just kind of know what our baseline is, we're going to work on, the first step is to determine what those metrics are and have a way that everyone can just kind of be starting with the same understanding.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that the town worked to get the data that had been requested, and I I know that I'm hoping that that information will actually become more available for other people and in a dashboard as well. So thank you. I'm looking for other hands, other points and comments. A question had been asked about the process for making all of this happen. I don't think that the committee has an answer fully, but again, identifying a process to institutionalize the work of the committee is one of the items in the charge that's given to the committee. And it is something that we do expect to have a recommendation on before our work is complete. So we agree that understanding and institutionalizing and figuring out how the work gets taken up in various areas of the town is a critical piece of the work that this group will do. Joe Lakehorn, you are next on our list.
All right, you get to see the COVID me.
Hello, Joe.
Good to see you, Marianne. I guess in reading this and in certainly thinking about the issues of race and racism for 50 years, I think one of the things that I found somewhat disappointing, even after all the hard work for which I would like to thank the committee and the dedication that you've put to this, and obviously the earnestness of the effort, is that, and I was taken by this in the president's speech last week, is that there must be an acknowledgement of the mistakes and the wrongs. And in America, we've been doing, in the United States, we've been doing this for 400 years. There's been racial injustice. So an acknowledgement, I feel that this really lacks authenticity because there isn't an acknowledgement that racist behavior exists in Needham. And from your speaking, the session before the select board, and also a call that I had with one of my constituents here in Precinct A, a rather lengthy call, like several hours, talking about race and the fact that he himself was a victim of racism on more than one occasion here in Needham. We need to acknowledge that before there can be reconciliation. We need to acknowledge it. And Gloria Grice and the Needham Historical Center have done a lot of work that, you know, and this is not a criticism, we're appropriating some money for the First Parish Church, but one of the early pastors, if not the founding pastor, was a slave owner. The only thing that Gloria couldn't tell was whether they were Native Americans or Black folk. You know, this nation, racial discrimination and racial inequity is baked into our Constitution. It was a political decision then to count slaves as 3/5 of people. Did you know, does anyone know that freed Black men and women were not citizens? That is why the amendment had to be done after the Civil War. After World War II, when money was flowing out under the GI Bill, it only went to white GIs at first. You know, there were issues too with regard to lending and mortgages where there was redlining. And even in here in Needham, there was steering based upon ethnic and racial groups. We need to admit this. There needs to be, for reconciliation, there has to be needing. And I am truly dismayed by comments by members of the committee. Oh, we can't go into that. We can't make this political. The solution, when people talk about policy, will take political will by the leaders in the town. It is a political issue. It was made a political issue by our founding fathers. And I wholeheartedly agree with the comment about civic education. People need to know the history of this country. They need to know that, the founding documents embody certain things, and that we can take, and they're as radical today as they were then, that all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights. We haven't at first given those or recognized those in everybody. And I'm thinking of this in the opening paragraph of "We the people in order to make a more perfect union." The antecedent to that union was the disastrous Articles of Confederation. And certainly the Constitution at that time was an improvement. They didn't say to make a perfect union. We're still working at that. And I think that that is really what we need to do. And we need to really face up, to use a religious term, the sins that we have committed. I mean, slavery and racial injustice in this country and is our original sin. And unfortunately, for those of us in a Christian background or others, you just can't be dunked in the river and have it washed away. It's going to take a lot of work. So I commend your group. I will be submitting a written thing. I think in some respects I was disappointed in the lack of concreteness, but maybe you will be adding to that as you go forward. A lot of my comments go to the concreteness. I do want to say that there's been a lot of focus on the policing, and I listened to the chief, and I was heartened by what he said, because he is basically a good person, willing to admit mistakes and try to do better, which is really what we all need to do, is just try to do better and do it earnestly. So again, I commend the work. I hope my comments, you'll see that there are some specific suggestions. I didn't include teaching civics, although friends and I have been discussing the need for that. And I wholeheartedly agree that people need to know how government works in the town, in the state, in the country. And thank you for your time and for listening. So, and for all of you, please stay well and get us the vaccine as soon as you can. Or eligible. You're welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, the next speaker I can see is Joanna Chella. Behind Joanne, I don't see any hands up right now. So if people are thinking about putting a hand up, by all means do it. But welcome, Joanne. There you are.
Hi, my name is Joanne Ocello. Yeah, sorry about the psychedelic background there. It's left over from work. But anyway, I am a resident and town meeting member, and I also am really pleased to hear and see the work that you've all been doing. I really appreciate the care you took, and you mentioned, Marianne, around visioning. And my experience with community organizing, not to cut corners on the visioning piece is very smart. So I really appreciate that. And I wanted to just speak to a little piece that I didn't come through for me in the vision, but I believe is an intent. So I just wanted to speak to it a bit. So it mentioned residents, businesses, and I also have a vision, which I think you all do too, around this being a welcoming place for people who visit here, who work here, who don't live here. And I think specifically about, Lily Marcellin, who spoke to us, about her visit to Volante's and the lack of welcome and mistreatment that she was afforded. I want this to be a welcoming community for her, for Marvin Henry, who works here but doesn't live here. So, and I believe that's the intention of this committee as well. I also, have myself as someone who lives here, been in a position of inviting work groups, to my home, colleagues, friends, people of color who pause when they find out my address and just wonder, like, can I come by myself? Can I walk from the T? Where should I park? Maybe will we do buddies? So this doesn't feel like a safe community for all who come here to visit or spend time. So I feel like that's part of your vision too, but it didn't come through in sort of the words. So I just wanted to add that. I am also someone who supported the citizens petition. And so I appreciate also Joe's acknowledgement of the importance of acknowledging, what's happened in the past and where we are right now, where we're starting from. And I do healing work around trauma and, knowing that racial trauma is real. I hope that also creating spaces or healing is part of the vision. So again, I kind of got that from the vision, but just was looking for a little bit more around that. And then a question about the citizens petition. Will the Nuwari group, and maybe you have already, and I missed it, but will there be an opportunity for you all to look at that, vote on it, like for us to hear a little bit more about the position of Nuwari on some of those elements? So those are my comments. I just want to thank you. Appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Joanne.
Okay.
I'm looking to see if there are any more hands. We've been asked several times about the citizens petition. We did have, we had it on our agenda for one night, and I believe we continued working on our vision. So we ended up not going through the citizens petition that evening, but the issues that were identified in the citizens petition are the issues that have guided the agenda and the upcoming agenda of meetings. So if people had a chance to look at our upcoming agenda, which is listed, we're going to be discussing it because there's more work than we are able to accommodate. We're clear. But we've had one session with the police. We'll have a second session with the police after the report from Ms. Tidwell is issued. We've had one session with the schools to hear about their progress with the REAL Coalition. We're planning a session on zoning and housing policy, on the town staffing efforts, and on community interactions. So after we've gone through some of those, then we'll have another public hearing. But embedded in all of those were all parts of or items that were identified in Article 17. And then I think we'll be in a better position to think about how Article 17 and these issues interact. I see Noah would like to speak again, and since I don't have another hand, I will take that hand. Noah, if you can come join us again.
Hi, thank you for letting me go one more time. There's just a point that I wanted to bring up. I feel I'm sitting here feeling like I need to speak it to this group. I would feel remiss if I didn't. So I watched the call with Chief Slittler, the previous Nuwari meeting, and I agree with Joe. I am sure he's a great guy, but his comments about his it not occurring to him that wearing a hoodie in Needham might be, or anywhere, if you're not a white person, would be something to think twice about. And also that the police hadn't really considered the way that the people they interact with, how they experience those interactions. And I understand it helped me, it illuminated to me a lot of what I'm seeing in policing. So it was very helpful on that front, and I really do appreciate his candor. But it is very chilling to hear that coming from the head of police, and that it now in 2021, or 2020 when he started to think about these things. Only then that it sort of started to occur to him. That was very chilling for me to hear. So I believe he's a good guy, but he is in charge of our police, and that's something that gives me pause. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Mary Lammy has her hand up. And Mary Lammy had joined us earlier from the school, so she can introduce herself. Hello, Mary.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Everyone. Thank you. Thanks for everything. I wanted to just be sure that it is okay for me to speak, not being a resident of Needham.
It is okay for you to speak. This is not town meeting. We don't have to get unanimous consent for you to speak. So you're welcome to speak. And if there's anybody else who's watching who is in the town for some reason as a visitor, as a worker, but doesn't live here, you are also welcome to speak, just so everybody knows. So thank you for asking that question.
Okay, thanks so much. And really, I just wanted to take a moment, as many have already done, to thank this committee for the great work in such a short amount of time. It really is incredibly impressive. And on behalf of the Real Coalition and the school system, I just wanted to share that we really feel so supported by the efforts of this committee and the engagement from the town through you. It certainly gives us a lot of hope and optimism for where we go from here. We are working really hard, as we've been trying to share, in regards to transforming the way that we are providing education in Needham, and recognize that it takes a full community. And so to know that this work is happening, it feels like we have been given a framing that is much larger than the school system, that just feels really supportive. So I just really wanted to be sure that I shared our appreciation for the work. Then I just wanted to echo a few points. I think it was Mark Hughes and a few others who spoke earlier today around the specific piece of American history and going further than just the whitewash of American history, but also talking about civic engagement. We talked earlier today as a Real Steering Committee about it being more than just about American history. The instruction that we provide in our classrooms generally can sometimes exclude populations, cultures, and so forth. And so I think there could be a little bit of expansion there to be sure that all cultures are represented and that we're really showing some proficiency in that area. The civic engagement is huge, and we are really hoping that we can put forth some work in that regards and some more support, particularly at our elementary level. The only other piece that I wanted to share, and it's minor, and it did sound like it was a work in progress, was the last piece around intentional practices. And this is so minor, so I thank you for the opportunity. But the last bullet reads, popularize the need to eliminate racial injustice. And there's something about that word that I don't know, it just doesn't seem to feel maybe perhaps what you had intended. When we were talking earlier, we were wondering about mobilize or something of that nature. And so I just thought I would share that feedback since I had a minute to speak with all of you. And again, just ending on just a great appreciation, and also looking for any way that the coalition can partner and help to support the work that we are trying to do in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. It was helpful to have you join us earlier when, because I think many folks on the committee learned about all the work that the Real Coalition was doing, and there is a sense that the schools are making great progress, but we do want to figure out how to partner so that we can move forward together. It's important to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
All right. I don't know if there's any other comments, and her picking up on that word popularized, the committee will remember that was a word we had some discussion about, and it's definitely felt unsettled still to us, so I'm not surprised to hear about that one. As we were trying to put those together and decided to put them out and get some feedback, even though they weren't fully formed. I'll give it a moment to see if there are any other comments. Otherwise, we would be prepared to wrap up this public hearing. You've given us some other things to think about. And I know that a number of people who submitted using the form submitted some specific language suggestions and some specific points that they thought that we should consider. So that is work that we will look at and discuss at our next meeting on February 8th as we're working to finalize this and make a recommendation to the select board. Ross Donald, you have raised your hand. We welcome you joining us.
All right, are we on here?
You are on.
All right, let me turn this other one off. So, all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to take a risk here and all right, there we go. Nope, not yet. Technology has a mind of its own. Shut off. All right, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to take a risk here and public comments. Joe Leghorn's comment one more time here about Reverend Townsend of the First Parish. Interesting how we look often says more about what our thoughts are currently. The congregation was about 20 people. It may have been 40, but a very small number. They were clearly implicated. His name was Homer, and I can't remember his last name. This was the reported slave. The congregation, if not the society, was actually implicated. It wasn't just one person of the free labor and so forth. So, and it's a very interesting dynamic. He was and fed and so forth. The work he did for the church was painting, chopping wood, all kinds of tasks. So how we look back at that, and at that era, there was a lot of were impressed by force. There was indentured servitude, which was one step interesting time, and I think our history and the church and Gloria are doing some work on things, as well as the book, reading the book Black Walden, which is the experience of slaves in Concord book. I'd like to make another comment, as well as everybody's been praising the occasion for people getting together and focusing on that, and you've shown some excellent leadership and ways and discussing them. I came across an interesting quote that goes, what does society require? The quote was, society requires conformity. We seek conformity. We have conformity in the time and place for this meeting, a meeting being the elemental society here, but we had to conform in order to even meet and hold this occasion. And yet, and we're still struggling for conformity. We're struggling for unity. We want to achieve that. We need to grow and change and have diversity. We don't want to have uniformity to the extent that we are, and I think the diversity part we should be looking for. I would want, there are ways in which I live in public housing now, so I have an interest. I hope an interesting perspective. I'd like to respond about meetings ago. It was a different context, but there were some people who were divorced or going through something, and they had to deal with some rules and regulations And so if the processes had been less restrictive, I thought that was very interesting. Dynamics of administration and bureaucracy can make things very difficult, even if they're trying to take advantage of available to them. Curiously, a similar situation. I live with them. I've interviewed a lot of them, asked them about their situation. One of the number one is dealing with the paperwork, administration, whether it's insurance, healthcare, even a lease arrangement with the housing authority. The paperwork becomes overwhelming. And if you're at the advantage of lawyers and accountants and bankers and so forth to assist you, so it becomes a burden. You need that kind of assistance. So I thought that was an interesting sharing for someone that's dealing with assets and property and so forth. But the problem is the same for a person that still has the paperwork to deal with. I just thought that was, I'd like to draw a comparison in that we may all be sharing. So, and if racism is systemic, then creativity and new ways to make adjustments in terms of the administration of rules.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it. Okay. So at this point in the evening, I'm not seeing any additional hands. So I think that we can go ahead and close the public meeting or the public hearing for this evening. I think these are all comments that we appreciate hearing from people. We look forward to any other feedback that comes in over the course of the next, do we have 2 weeks? We have 2 weeks between now and February 8th. And again, if somebody's not sure where to submit feedback, if you go to the Newari page on the website, you will find a QR code that takes you to the survey or the email address for newari@needhamma.gov. So either of those are methods that you can provide input to the committee before our next meeting on the 8th to finish. I'm going to just close actually with a portion of Amanda Gordon's The Hill We Climb, because to me it spoke to the work that we have and where we've come from. And here we heard people tonight talking about acknowledging where we've come from, but this I think does both. And I've just grabbed two different clauses. So a portion that spoke to me for the work of Newari was this: somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We are striving to forge a union with purpose to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. So I do think that is what we're trying to do. And I am grateful to the committee. I'm grateful to Lisa Smith McQueenie for her work with us. I'm grateful to the citizens who have taken the time to provide feedback. I'm grateful to all of those who came to listen tonight. And I hope that you also have the opportunity to see some of the work of Newari and the work of other town organizations as they're helping to inform our work as we think about how we go forward to make Needham a more equitable and just place for all of our citizens. I think it was Joe Leghorn who brought up the phrase, in order to form a more perfect union. And, you know, I really think we've all lived through, I don't know, 5 years, however many years of Make America Great Again. And Make America Great Again means that it was great at one point and then it wasn't, or whatever. I think really the purpose of all of us is we are working together to make America great. We're trying to get there, right? And we're working to make it great every day for everyone. And that is the real work that we need to do. So I am glad that Needham is choosing to do this work. And I'm grateful for everyone who is willing to work with us in trying to make that a reality. So thank you. Those of you who are here at the meeting are welcome to stay for the remainder of our meeting. We are going to be discussing an article that Marcus has shared with the group, and we are also going to be looking at our schedule and having some discussion about how our schedule rolls out over the next couple of months leading up to town meeting. So that is our next plan. All right. Hello again, everybody who's been listening patiently. I know I was scribbling notes as they were happening. I'm certain that everybody was sort of taking things that had particular meaning for them that you want to carry forward, and we will come back and discuss all of those on February 8th, as well as all the other input that's come in. And hopefully we'll hear more. So I think I look forward to that. The next item on our agenda was the white fragility article. Marcus, do you want to lead off that discussion? I'm trying to figure out where I put it here. Hang on. I know I had it saved up. Marcus had shared an article with the committee, and so we've talked about that we do have the ability to share resources that we find that speak to us or that speak to an issue that we think is important for the committee to consider. And this was the first one that was shared, but anybody may share a resource, so I encourage that.
Do you want me to talk now?
Please.
All right, awesome. I think why I shared this, what made me want to share this with the group was the last conversation I think we had with the chief. And, you know, when people, it talks about a host of different things. You know, it talks about just people that experience white fragility and, you know, how it they may not be racist, but their actions and things that they do may come off as such. And talking about the term racial stamina, you know, giving people, having white people be more comfortable with having difficult conversations and engaging with people of color. And I think that is just so important in our community because these conversations have to and will happen, but it's, you know, trying not to have the anger behind it or, you know, the other connotations that make you feel like you're on the defense when you're having these conversations with people of color. And when they may be telling you their experiences or things that they've experienced through their lived experiences and not coming from a place of that we're blaming or anything like that, just trying to share and trying to get the majority to kind of understand. And I think there were some things over the last couple meetings where I just think I thought it would be helpful for the group to kind of look at, discuss, and kind of see what they thought about this article and, you know, how we can better ourselves in many ways as well. So that's kind of what made me think about to share this. And I would love to see if anybody else read it or had any questions or dialogue about it from our group.
I just want to say to everybody, I sent a note to Marcus and said this racial stamina phrase I had never heard before, and I think it is just awesome. Yeah,
absolutely.
Jay, do you want to speak? I'm presuming you unmuted, so you want to be up, right?
Absolutely. So Marcus, first and foremost, thanks for the article. I think when we look at having difficult discussions and more specifically using certain terms, this is an introductory to classifying different things that people may feel, you know, as opposed to saying, well, you may be a white supremacist or, you know, you may have white privilege. This is a conversation starter on fragility and more specifically how it differentiates between the other two terms. Because there's a lot of discussion that we've had in this committee about staying away from certain terms, but the conversation still needs to be had. And I think somewhere within our objectives or perhaps even in the vision that we can speak to and introduce that term of white fragility and have a conversation about what it's about and where it goes from there.
I was going to say, and you're right, there have been several phrases that we've been trying to figure out. Can we incorporate them? Can we not incorporate them? How do we incorporate them so that they can still invite people in so that we actually have the conversation, because that's really the important part. Yes. Other thoughts as people read this? Matt?
Markson, thank you for that article. You know, we heard tonight about buy-in, and I think sometimes, and I know there's the whole discussion on these terms, white supremacy, etc. To me, and I know things that just seems like there are a lot of labels going on. And I think that's why people, in my opinion, have difficulties with these conversations, because they're afraid to kind of either be labeled or that they're going to have a difficult conversation and then, you know, kind of being stereotyped because they're having it. So I think in this group, we've been lucky to be able to have these open and honest conversations without those, you know, one of the leading terms is respect. And, you know, you go to town meeting and we're one community, we're one town. So I think we've been lucky to have that. To me, my concern is, especially from our board, adopting something is that we represent the entire community. And although some people might not see the language as dividing, I want to just make sure that we're not, you know, that we're not dividing and we're not just kind of stereotyping of whites think this or blacks think this or other ethnic people feel this way. We are one community. And I just think when we label, it does get, and I got some emails about the vision statement over the weekend, and the labels are troubling to some. And I think that we just have to keep that in mind. You know, maybe among this group, we use them, but I think as a whole community, we adopt something, we just have to keep that in mind.
I agree with what you're saying, but I feel like in essence of that, you know, not identifying these strong terms and things that are true and that have happened and what we're built on is something that needs to be probably said and done. And as a community, I know, like you said, as a select board, it's maybe a little bit tougher to adopt these more harsher words, but in reality, these harsh words are how and, you know, why the things are the way they are. So if we continue to sugarcoat and not acknowledge them, kind of like what Joe said, then are we doing a disservice to the town? And that's what I guess I struggle with all of this. And like you said, having these uncomfortable conversations. Maybe I'm sure there's some people that are responding that maybe haven't had any uncomfortable conversations. Maybe, you know, who's at their dinner table or the people that they're communicating with on a day-to-day haven't had these lived experiences and hasn't been in their ancestry and hasn't gone on for generations. So it could be uncomfortable for them. So I think as a town as a whole, the town to understand these terms and how relevant they are and how ingrained they are into the way that we have been founded, the way that we've been governed. Like all these things are in there. It's just, we have to bring them to light and we have to not continue to just, you know, tiptoe around some of these and really talk about them and do what we can to eradicate, you know, some of these things that have been here for so long.
Natasha?
So I think I understand what Matt is saying, but I think in general, if we're here to create change, right? Because the status quo is not necessarily productive to creating a more racially integrated Needham, which is really another word for saying diversity, I guess. But the biggest thing is because change requires disruption and disruption allows for opportunity, right? So if someone in town, because 85% or so of the town is similar, have never experienced being a minority because they've always been a majority, they need to, you know, understand and we need to, as a town, be educated as to what that means. And so I think it's okay if people feel a little uncomfortable, but I also feel like we owe the town education because the majority of the town doesn't understand that they mean well, but some of the actions that are just typical of how they were raised or how we were all raised causes division. And so I guess, and people I know are afraid of, okay, so if things are going to change, what am I going to lose? Right. So I think it's just human nature. I think there's a piece of education that needs to be kind of embraced by all, not just the people that are interested in changing this, but we need to figure out how to make people understand that it's okay to question things, that they don't need to be scared to bring up these really difficult situations, and that unless we bring it up, we're never going to see any change.
And I completely agree that there needs to be change and we have to move forward. I guess my concern is the labeling. And you look at it, it's almost like, okay, being white, it's almost saying being white is, let's say, bad, or, you know, with some of the terms. And I just want to make sure that when we use those terms, that the general population doesn't feel that way. And I'll tell you, like, my grandparents came from Italy, right? Back at the turn of the century. My father grew up here, born in 1930, okay? Italians in Needham were mocked and there was a lot of prejudice. I hear the stories all about it, from the teachers to the students, et cetera. What Black people went through is probably 10 times as worse. I can never speak to that, okay? But I can speak to his and my uncles and their growing up in town and how it's changed since then. So my point here is not that we have to change things. Things have to go forward. Things are going to change. It's just using the labels, to me, can divide people. And I know I keep saying it and there's a disagreement on it. That's my concern from a town board, the executive board of the town, using certain terms, I think can divide a community where we all want this buy-in.
So I think several people are hoping to speak. I think Jen, Ramin, and Vivian, I've all seen hands. So Jen, do you want to go next?
I do. I want to first say thank you to Marcus for pulling this out and talking about it with all of us. I think that one of the things that when I read the article made me kind of go back and rethink all of the meetings that we've had was kind of some squirming myself to feel like, oh, how many things may I have said that might be giving off some of those white fragility sound waves. And I want to acknowledge that, I don't know, that it pains me to think that anybody's sitting on the call feeling like they can't say what they want to say, even here within this group. The other thing is that I think that while using some language might lead to some divisions, I think that that's inevitable in a lot of ways, and that by deciding to use some words over other words, it's not that we're using some words to make everybody feel comfortable. Not using some words is definitely making some people not feel comfortable. So by not using the words that we want to put out there to challenge people to think about this differently, we are sending an strong message that we, even as the group who's been assembled to kind of lead change in the town, are not willing to kind of put ourselves out there and feel the risk of what those terms mean. And I think that we need to think about, you know, what risks there are to me as a white person as saying something and putting my foot in my mouth and thinking my neighbors are going to think I'm a racist or what have you. That risk is just a risk, you know, to my ego and my personal reputation maybe, but that the risk that some of our neighbors of color are coming to this conversation with are certainly much greater than that. And so in my opinion, we owe it to them to be willing to take the risk ourselves, to get out there and feel uncomfortable and think about these things maybe in a way that we haven't been thinking about it before. And I also think that we have an opportunity as this town committee to really be an example of kind of challenging ourselves and struggling with the terms and trying to figure out how we fit into what those terms really mean. And that in doing that, we might pull away some of the stigma so that when we're talking about white supremacy, it's not saying all white people are bad at all. It's talking about a lot of other things. And so that maybe if we can normalize some of those terms, we might take some of the emotion out of them and let people get into this conversation without feeling like if they make a mistake or if they say something wrong, that everybody in town is going to think that they're a racist.
Thank you, Jen. Well said. Ramin.
Thank you, Jen.
I think there are a set of phrases and words that are so eloquent in conveying the reality of racism, that are so educational, that there is so much behind these words, like, you know, or phrase like white fragility. I think the problem is that in the past few years, people are weaponizing words and phrases. And I think to me, it would be the challenge is to use these meaningful terms in a context that is educational, informative, transformative, but not offensive, in the sense of not being accusatory or not being putting down one group versus the other group, or being weaponized. So I think we can use these terms, and we should use them because they're so eloquent. They convey so much meaning. Each of them, when you think about it, when you read an article that Marcus shared, there's so much in there. But do it in such a way that is in the context of a transformation and education, rather than the context of, of being an offense.
I like that idea. Thank you for conveying that one. As I keep thinking about, white fragility into racial stamina, the building of that muscle that we all need to build. So Vivian and then Toyin.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what everybody said, but also picking up on some of the comments we heard in the public hearing, as well as some of my other work, which is that language is very important. And what's important about language is not only the vocabulary that is used, the actual words, but the definitions and the contexts and the tone. And so, I understand, Matt, and I see some of the comments that, we're not using strong enough language, or we're using language that's too strong, right? And so I think what's important is to be sure that in the work that we're doing, we're putting out the context within which those language terms are used. What's the definition of a phrase? What's the definition of a particular word? I mean, we've sort of batted all this around in coming up with our vision statement when we've talked about concepts. What is racism? What is racial bias? What is discrimination? They all have very different meanings in different contexts, in different places, and for different people based on their own personal lived experiences. And so I think it's important for us to be sure we're putting out some sort of guidance about what we mean and what we're talking about. When people talk about systemic racism, some people may immediately think, oh, we're talking about Blacks and African Americans, and we're talking about color and ethnicities. Well, we could be talking about, Matt, to your point, the way Italian immigrants were treated, the way Chinese were excluded from this country, or that Japanese were interned, or that Israeli refugees, Jewish refugees from Europe were excluded from immigrating. So I think it's very important for us to invoke those concepts of education, not just about history and civics, but also about educating what we mean by the terms and the words that we use.
Thank you, Vivian. Toyin.
Hi, how you doing? I know in the past I've sort of been the person to say, maybe we shouldn't use some of these terms, and I'm gonna try to keep this calm. But we are talking about Black versus white racism, and this is where education becomes so important. No other group has been oppressed by this country like African Americans have been oppressed. So when I hear someone say something about an Italian person or an Irish person who was oppressed, they were, but once they became white or became the majority, they did worse to us. Once they got to that point, suddenly, that's where the police force came from, the Boston police force. They've come a long way, but they started as Irish people who were treated poorly by who was the majority. And then once they got power, they treated the Black people like worse. So I just don't want people to bring up sort of, we could be talking about this, we could be talking about that. No, we're talking about 400 or so odd years of oppression that has continued until today. So I don't want any ifs, ands, or buts or that. And I used to be the person who said, maybe we shouldn't use white supremacy, maybe we shouldn't use white fragility. And I'm kind of like, we should use these terms. And like Vivian said, it depends on how you use the term. So if you kind of say white fragility and just leave it there, that might not work. But you might say, what do you think white fragility means? And then you have definitions. What do you think white supremacy means? And you can have, so you can put it in a way that people will be drawn in, but I really feel like we need to have those terms front and present, because people really need to understand it. That's just, that's my 2 cents at this point.
And I'm going to just pipe in and add my 2 cents, which is that if we don't use these terms with definitions, with context, with an understanding of the shared history, then we're not being honest. And the work that we're doing won't have the integrity we want it to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's important.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
I agree too. One of the thoughts, and then I'm going to go to Sue, that I've been carrying in my head is this question, I think it was first raised by Joe, about acknowledging the history. Now, our vision is deliberately forward thinking, right? But I almost wondered if there's a model from land acknowledgements that creates some kind of acknowledgement of the past. And I'm just kind of rolling that in my head. So I'll put it out there for other people to let it roll around in their heads too. Sue.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you all, Marcus, especially for forwarding that article, and all of you for your comments. I've heard Robin DiAngelo speak, but I hadn't read her book, and I think the article you shared was terrific because it was so accessible. So I wonder first if that's on our website, if we can make that available to the community. I don't know if that's okay or not okay to do, so I'm just asking that question somehow. But I don't think that we've used white fragility in our documents, in our guiding principles. And I think it's an important addition to how we talk about this, because I think it's a space for white people to kind of take some ownership in a way that, isn't white supremacy, but recognizes that no matter how hard we try, we have to listen harder, and we have to recognize that we, regardless of, the fact that we weren't here over the last 400 years, we own a piece of this now, and we have to take responsibility for that. And I think white fragility helps us to access that in a way that some of the other terms don't. Does that make sense? So we haven't gotten to that, but maybe next time when we come back to revisit, based on the input that we've received, I hope that we can also take a look at how to integrate that term white fragility into what we're bringing to the community. So thank you all.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on the article? Toyin and then Vivian.
Sorry, this is not about the article itself, but it's about a model of going forward.
Okay.
And obviously this is not going to happen, but a good comparison is Nazi Germany. So if you look at what they've done with their sordid past, and yes, it was only 12 years versus 400 years, but they are very, very upfront about the history that they did. Everyone's taught it. There's monuments to the victims, not to the Confederate. We've immortalized the Confederate flag and the Confederacy, and those good old days, and sort of whitewashed it and made it seem so like such a great thing. Whereas you don't see in Germany them flying the swastika and statues to Hitler and the schools named after the generals that were in the Third Reich. So there is a model for it. I don't think it will ever happen to that extent because it's going to be some discomfort. But when you talk to people from Germany, apparently they are cognizant of it. They don't feel necessarily responsible because it's been quite a while, but they're cognizant of it and sort of make changes and make reparations for things like that. So there is a model, and that's why I think sort of education is so critical, because if you really, I think if you really go through American history and see how things came to where they are, you'll realize that things will never change until everyone, black, white, every race sort of reads about our history and goes forward with some changes regarding it.
And sees how embedded it is. Great, thank you. Vivian?
I think what's also embedded in all this conversation, and yes, it is about race and it is about color and it is about history, is that people are generally, people are fragile. They're fragile because they're uncomfortable. When they're uncomfortable or they're threatened, they feel that their fragility is going to be exposed. And so I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of as we move forward is making sure that we are setting the table for these kinds of difficult conversations where there is grace, there is respect, there is sharing, there is an appreciation for differences, even and an understanding that even if people's opinions are different, or their experiences are different, that it doesn't diminish those of others. And so I think fragility is an important concept, Sue, to think about. I think white fragility is very specifically important in the conversations that we're having. And yet, like everything else, we are talking about a community initiative that goes beyond skin color. And that community initiative is to recognize the history, educate our community, and engage our community members in various activities, and get their buy-in to charting that positive course that we're talking about and respecting the past.
It's a tall order, but we're going to figure out how to do it. Sue.
So I just wanted to add one more thing to the conversation, which is that, you know, we talk a lot about, I think, attitudes and engaging in conversation and education. But part of me just wants to like lead with policies and practices, because sometimes you just have to institutionalize the change before you can bring along all the attitudes that go with that. So I'm not exactly sure how that works for us. But I hope that in this process we can, you know, focus a lot on what we can do quicker than some other things. And I do appreciate also what several of our community members brought to the table tonight about data and measurement, in the sense that, you know, sometimes that's what people respond to is, you know, and we have to be really careful about that. But I do think that setting the table for how we measure will help to actually emphasize what we care about. So that's hard, but I just wanted to add that.
Vivian?
I think that metrics, data, I think that's very important. And I think that social scientists will say that's the hallmark, if you will, of measuring success. I think what we're talking about is accountability. And so I think it's figuring out how do we make sure that there is accountability. And metrics and data may be one part of it. I don't think it's the whole answer. But we should talk about it.
So I agree, it's not the whole answer. I sit here thinking about one of my mentors from Motorola, which Vivian will remember. But I think about Jerry Murray saying we inspect what we expect. And that is a piece of accountability, is having that in the first place. So we will be talking about what does that look like for the items that we think are important for the town to be paying attention to, and how various groups in the town can be responsible for those. Jay?
One of the things from the community listening session that people talked about was bringing along the committee members with us. I think as we interview or have these listening sessions with other folks, we should be pushing out a couple questions ahead of time that get them to think about what we're doing and what policies they have, so that we can bring them along the process as opposed to trying to tell them what to do. So maybe there's, as part of what we think about, and I can take a stab at a couple of questions and send them out to the group, but maybe we can have a more pointed discussion around what we want to address and what they can address, and let them be the drivers, because they're in that seat from a day-to-day perspective, to give us a better racial equity picture.
And I think we have some folks who are in a better position already to talk about that than others. And we're going to see differing levels of skill and awareness in the varying groups that we talk to. But I think having some of those questions up front is actually a great idea. And I think that would be a good practice. Matt and Natasha, I was going to say maybe this is a good time to turn to our schedule, but Matt and then Natasha.
Natasha? No, just kidding.
I agree with Jay's comments, and I think Vivian makes a good point about fragility. I do think, these discussions are really, really difficult, and we've had them amongst ourselves and with people of different races, and I just think that's a good point. I do also just want to note, in our charge, and race and ethnicity has been brought up. It actually is in the charge when it says others who have been marginalized due to their race or ethnicity. It's just something we want to think about if that's the direction. I know it was brought up maybe a couple of meetings ago, or maybe it's more of a different direction of, as was talked about, Black, focus on those issues. So just something to think about as we look again at our charge, what we're trying to accomplish. But thank you. I really enjoy these broad conversations.
Natasha.
I just wanted to add that I've been doing a lot of reading, and that a lot of you probably have also. It would be good to have a repository of these books, because some people might not feel comfortable in these meetings, but they might feel comfortable reading books about things that, they're not as familiar with. And I wasn't familiar with a lot of these books, and I wasn't familiar. Some of them that come to mind is not only the true white fragility, not just the what Marcus sent, but the book also is really helpful. I also read So You Want to Talk About Race, which is really helpful. But I'm reading The Color of Law, which is about zoning, racial zoning, and redlining and all of that, which is eye-opening to me. So I don't know a lot of these things either. I've been learning through many years of doing my own research. And I think it's really helpful for people to read and kind of process on their own and then talk about it. And so anyway, I just think that there are a lot of really good resources that people who may feel uncomfortable coming to these meetings of any race, it would be helpful. And I've learned a lot, and I thought, I know it all. I really don't know much. And I'm learning every single day. And so just for those of us who are minorities, we also are learning a lot, because we're used to living in a society where there are rules that we followed since we were born, and we don't know any different either. That these things we know, I mean, there's some that are really obvious, but there are so many things that are not as obvious. And I think it's really worth for people to spend a little bit of time doing research. And if some of us have read some of these books, maybe we can continue to put them in a repository so that others can also read them and become part of the conversation.
So I know that Kate and I started talking about a list of a number of these resources early on. So she's got everything that we've talked about so far, I believe, is already on that list. But there are others I think that people know about. So I was going to say, if you have something that you think should be on our resource list, if you can get it to Kate, and we will get that list of resources and opportunities for reading to the website so that people can see it.
I can start it and send it out.
The Needham Diversity Initiative's website, needhamdiversity.org, has a page devoted to resource materials, books, articles, videos that are of educational nature. It's a good and it's going to be even more expanded soon.
So maybe that's the place that we should point, but it feels like we should have a consolidated resource list for the town.
Kate, do you have do you maybe have a Google Doc that we can add to amongst this group? I mean, we have a wide range of.
I'll work something out. Google isn't the way we can operate, but we'll get you a document.
Well, I'm thinking of not burdening you with multiple emails, but I'll send a list to you and Katie.
Great.
Okay, terrific. Any other thoughts before we turn to talking about our schedule? We're at 7:50, so I appreciate again everybody's indulgence this evening as we're continuing to talk, and we'll eat dinner whenever it finally happens tonight. Okay, let's take a look at our schedule. So here's the thing. What have we learned? I think we've learned that for us to have the kind of productive, rich, robust, thoughtful conversations that we want to have, that all of those conversations take longer than we thought. So that's the first thing that I think we've learned. I think when we started this work back in October, there was an idea that the committee could work and we would be working from now until town meeting. We'd give our report at town meeting, we'd be finished. I think what we've now figured out is we can't even get in all the meetings that we thought we were going to be able to organize between now and town meeting. And we certainly won't have figured out how to make a recommendation for how to institutionalize things by town meeting. So with the committee's indulgence, I'm going to ask you to start to think about wrapping your heads around something that, while we thought it was a one-year commitment, if we could ask you to consider a commitment that probably goes through at least another year. As a 2-year commitment. I don't think it's a forever commitment. Nobody should be making a forever commitment, but with a goal of being able to get to some interim report for town meeting this May, but maybe a report by a year from now that's let us really go through these major organizations within town, our housing, our police, education, hiring, the critical areas that have been identified, so that we can consider each of those and be able to make some recommendations as it relates to accountability and metrics and institutionalization of the practices and the areas for improvement that might need to be taken up by particular groups. And we'd be able to identify who those groups are. But maybe that's a goal that's better suited to May a year from now, certainly, than May this spring. So I guess the first question is, what do people think about that generally?
My first impression is that that's a very long time to say 2 years. If we're really trying to affect change, and I think maybe we look at certain areas, particularly as we heard on the call in regards to policing, housing, and schooling, maybe those can be prioritized and we can have at least some sort of immediate action, particularly as it pertains to policing. From a 2-year commitment, given how we laid the schedule out, I'm happy to continue on it, but I feel like we should have some progress long before that, i.e., by town meeting, at least on a key area of perhaps policing.
Okay. Natasha?
I agree with Jay. I think I appreciate trying to be really thorough, and I think we can get there in the 2 years, but I think we need a kind of an action items by town meeting to say this is how we're going to move forward. We don't have to figure it all out, but at least have a plan so that we can start, and then we can start kind of going into the weeds of that plan as we continue on. So I'd be more than happy to stay on, but I feel like by town meeting, we should kind of have just a big picture of where we're headed and have a plan.
I agree with that. I am hoping by town meeting that we will have a big picture. I mean, that was part of what we were trying to do, was go and get a survey kind of in all the areas and a little bit deeper in policing for sure. And Jay, to your point, I agree, 2 years is a long time. To the extent that we don't need 2 years, that would be great. It seems to me that looking at May is too short. I'm not sure what the right length is, but I agree completely that we do want to make some concrete progress and set some very concrete goals. So I hear you. I think we've all got plenty of other meetings to get on to, and we do want to make progress here. That's important. Any other thoughts? Because if not, then I would like to just, Sue, thank you. Unmute.
I'll try to be really brief, but I wonder if there's an opportunity for us as we head into the second year of thinking about what of this whole process is within the existing town infrastructure. So in other words, who's the accountable body? Is it Newari or is it the select board? And then what can we hold, the schools and the planning board and, the police accountable for? that they can produce and that they can bring forward, and so that the responsibility doesn't sit within Newari. That's just what I want to say.
So I think that's important because ultimately Newari is not a standing committee.
Right.
So the work that we're setting up and staging is all work that has to be taken in and accepted by somebody else. So for example, if we think about the schools with the Real Coalition has set a work plan. And what we talked about is we needed to understand that work plan. And then I think we're going to have a discussion that says, is there something that we've learned that we would like the Real Coalition to consider that may adjust a work plan or that may get added to the work plan that hasn't been there? So it's something like that. But the schools and the Real Coalition own those issues, not Newari ultimately, for example.
And they're accountable to the school committee.
And they're accountable to the school committee, yes.
And the voters, right? Elected officials should really, right?
Always.
Always.
Always. Okay. So if that general framework, longer than May, not forever, hopefully less than 2 years, specific accountability, all right, is one that can work for the group, then I appreciate your indulgence as we're trying to do this both expeditiously and thoughtfully. We had originally put on the schedule that February 8th would be bringing the chief back. And we now know that we will not have the report on February 8th, and I don't have a date to propose yet. But I would propose that the chief not come back until that report is available so that we can have a specific discussion with the chief based on the information in the report and the feedback on the protocols and practices of the department. Now, on February 8th, we've already sort of taken over that space to say we will use that time to finalize the vision and the guiding principles and hopefully the intentional practices at that meeting so that we can make a recommendation that will go to the select board the next night, hopefully for adoption, and then can go out to the town. My guess is that most of our February 8th meeting will end up being devoted to finalizing that particular language so that we are in fact all comfortable with it and we can wrap our heads around if we do choose to include white supremacy, white fragility, some other terms that we find a way to incorporate and explain those, you know, include their definitions with a tone that we're all comfortable with. Does that seem like that's February 8th to everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should just dedicate the whole meeting to that and nothing else and make sure
Okay.
we are all set.
And maybe we'll have dinner before 9 o'clock at night then.
We'll see.
We'll see. All right. We tentatively had February 22nd for zoning and housing policy. I think that's also a priority of this group to be better informed about that. So what I would encourage, thinking back to Jay's comment, is that we should think about what specific policy questions might we want to encourage in that area that we could give to those speakers ahead of time that they could be considering before they come to speak with us. Vivian? Question?
Yes, I was just going to ask, will we have all the public feedback from I know Katie said she was going to leave open the feedback form. And I'm just wondering if we'll have all of that information before our meeting on February 8th as we sort of try to finalize things.
So we will have that information before February 8th. Katie, do you want to say something?
Just to say, at this point, the plan was to close out the survey at noon on the 8th. But if people would prefer, I can send updates periodically if you don't want to get it all at noon that day. I'm seeing nods. So
I think that would be great to get maybe a couple of updates along the way.
yeah, we'll do.
Let's process the information and feedback.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Vivian, for asking that. March 8th, I know that Kate and Katie have Rachel Glisper and Alex McNeil lined up to talk about town staffing and hiring. I am wondering if we're going to need to figure out maybe another extra meeting for when to bring the chief back, and I just don't know that timing. Kate, do you have any thoughts about that? Because it seems like the other items that we have on this are all things that we need to do that are going to be important for providing even an initial report to town meeting.
So I fully expect the report in the next 2 weeks, or at least that's, you know, where we're targeting. So I also think, you know, anybody who's going to present on it needs, you know, a little bit of time to read it and process it. But I think that as soon as we know, we could get that on the schedule.
So I guess I'm carrying in my head, and the question for the committee will be, you know, would we be able to maybe consider an extra meeting sometime in March? So that we could bring the chief back and have another policing discussion.
There
Sue?
are 5 Mondays in March, so that makes it a little easier.
And no holidays for schools or any of that in March, so plenty of opportunities, I guess. Okay, but so the sooner we can sort of organize a date, the better. And I think we will wait until we actually have the report in hand before we set a date. But if your schedule makes some other Monday in March a challenge, if you could please flag that for Kate and Katie, just for planning as we're trying to think about this, that would be helpful. Other thoughts looking at the items that we have rolling out on the schedule? That will give us 2 meetings, one for another listening session to hear from people again early in April, and then a meeting to really try to organize our report for town meeting. Town meeting, I know we don't have dates, but it will be early in May is sort of what the anticipation is right now. Question, Jen?
Do we know who would be coming to talk with us at the meeting where we're going to be talking about housing?
Kate, do you know who specifically is coming yet?
I think you and Matt and Katie and I have a meeting to talk about that coming up. So we'll get right back to you. If you have suggestions, please send them to us.
I'm not sure. Is there somebody that could speak to some of the history that's gone into the town planning and maybe the creation of the housing authority, or is there anybody that could bring that kind of perspective?
Well, so there's multiple layers here, right? There's layers around zoning, which is a general issue in town, and then there's issues around housing related to the housing authority. Probably either of those could fill up a whole session on its own. And I think there are probably a couple of people who could talk about the history from a planning perspective. There's some folks who are on the select board who could bring some of that history forward. But so we may engage one or the other of them, and we may also engage someone who's been working on issues of affordable housing in the town, like Karen Sonnenberg. So we'll have to talk about who the best people are so that we can have a good discussion. Kate?
If I may, Marianne, we've been putting together a list of the kinds of housing projects and initiatives that we've worked on over the last decade or so. And so at least to get that out to
people so that they know. Yeah.
Are there specific questions that the committee members are, I mean, we've talked about housing as being kind of an issue that we want to talk about. Are there certain things that want to be able to have a conversation about that night that could help guide who we invite to come in that night?
I think that's a good idea to try to, not tonight, but I think if we give suggestions, there's so many aspects to housing, right? Increasing affordable housing, districts like Miriam was talking about, housing authority. I think if we hear what types of areas we want to focus on, that's going to drive who we want to come in. But I think right now it's such a broad topic. I'm interested in hearing what the committee has to say on what direction we want to go in.
And I think there were a couple of questions that were raised in Article 17, but the answer is they're not the exclusive questions I think that people have talked about in housing. So I guess I would say I welcome any feedback from any of you about specific questions that you might want to engage on there so that we do get the right speakers for the committee. Anything else? So if people want to take another look at the overall schedule, if you have any thoughts for other pieces, by all means, let us know. And we will, meanwhile, I know that Lisa has been listening to our discussion tonight, and she will also be getting the various feedback. Yeah, say hello, right? And she will also be getting all the feedback that we're receiving so that we can be working to develop, any tweaking that we want to do of the statements that we've got. Okay. Other discussion for this evening? If there's not, then I would be willing to entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Okay.
We're getting good at this. Are we ready for a roll call vote?
Yes, we're ready.
Okay, Matt.
Yes.
Sue.
Yes.
Jen.
Yes.
Marcus.
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Ramin.
Let me think about that. Yes.
Vivian.
Yes.
Natasha.
Yes.
Toyin.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you all. Thank you for an evening, and thank you to our attendees. And I know that people were worried that it would feel awkward and uncomfortable. I'm hoping tonight didn't feel totally awkward and uncomfortable for the public hearing. And I know that we all listened and are carrying what we heard with us. And we will work together and figure this out. Thank you.
Thank you.
You all have a great night.
Night,
Goodbye,
everybody.
everyone.